May 1945, Camp Hearn, Texas. A German woman named Greta Hoffmann sat in the mess hall staring at her breakfast tray. Bacon, scrambled eggs, toast with butter, real coffee. She had been told Americans would starve her. They fed her like family. She picked up the bacon. The smell hit her first. Smoky, rich American. Her hands shook. She took one bite, and then she started to cry. They told us the Americans were monsters. They told us to fear capture more than death. They told us that if we were taken prisoner, we would be violated, starved, worked to death. They lied about everything. But I didn't know that yet. Not on that April morning in 1945, when an American officer walked down the line and gave us an order that made my blood turn to ice. Open your coat. 3 words. That was all. I thought my life was ending. I was wrong. What ended that day wasn't my life. It was my fear. This is the true story of 200 German women. Clerks, nurses, drivers, radio operators who surrendered to American forces in April 1945. They expected brutality. They received bacon and blankets. They expected assault. They received medical care and dignity. They expected hell. They received Texas. But the journey from fear to freedom wasn't instant. It took one morning, one inspection, one command, and one simple truth that shattered years of lies. What really happened when that American officer said, "Open your coat"? Why did the women cry not from pain but from relief? And what does this story reveal about the difference between propaganda and reality, between enemies and human beings? Stay until the end, because this story, buried in archives for decades, will show you something powerful. Even in war, even between enemies, humanity can survive, if you follow the rules. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. If you served in World War II, or if your father or grandfather did, I'd love to know. What did they tell you about German prisoners in America? Did they ever mention the camps in Texas, the farms in Wisconsin, the factories in New York? Leave a comment below and share their stories. Let's honor the greatest generation together. And if you love untold history from World War II, hit that subscribe button right now. We uncover stories like this every week, stories that aren't in the textbooks but should be. Now, let's go back to April 1945, to a muddy field near the Rhine, to 200 terrified women, and to the moment everything changed. They weren't soldiers. They were daughters, sisters, fiancées, women who had signed up to type, to drive, to help, and who ended up caught in the collapse of the Third Reich. Let me introduce you to 6 of them. Greta Hoffmann, 22 years old, radio operator from Bavaria. Greta learned Morse code from her father, a train station operator. When the Wehrmacht needed signal assistance, she volunteered. It seemed patriotic, safe. By April 1945, she was operating radios in a bunker that shook every time Allied artillery hit. She kept her diary in coded shorthand. She never wrote about fear. She didn't need to. You could see it in the crossed-out dates, the smudged ink, the way her handwriting got smaller as the war got worse. Her secret. She had stopped believing in victory in 1943. But she kept working. Because what else was there? Liesl Brenner, 24 years old, supply clerk from Frankfurt. Liesel's fiancé Karl disappeared at Stalingrad in 1943. She kept his last letter in her coat pocket. Every night she'd unfold it and read the same line. War makes us forget we're human. Don't forget. She worked in a depot basement stamping requisition forms. Boring. Safe. Until February 1945, when American tanks appeared on the horizon and the depot was abandoned in 4 hours. Liesl grabbed her coat, Karl's letter still inside, and ran. Anneliese Schreiber, 19 years old. Nurse's aide from a Catholic family. Her father was a country doctor. Anneliese volunteered because it seemed noble. She imagined clean hospitals, grateful soldiers, a chance to serve. Instead, she got a field station that moved every 3 days. Wounded men on tables made of doors. Never enough morphine. Never enough bandages. She had a recurring nightmare. A soldier screaming for his mother while she held pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. By April, she was coughing blood, She didn't tell anyone. Weakness meant death. Waltraud Becker, 28 years old, truck driver from Hamburg, lost her brother in 1944. Waltraud was older, stronger, quieter. She had worked in her family's auto shop before the war. When they needed drivers, she stepped up. She drove supply trucks through mud, through smoke, through roads clogged with refugees and deserters. She learned one rule early: don't look at the faces. If you looked, you'd see the fear, the desperation, the knowledge that the war was lost. Better to keep your eyes forward and your hands on the wheel. Helena Vogel, 26 years old, translator, civilian. Her husband was in a French POW camp. Helena wasn't even military. She was a civilian translator attached to a Wehrmacht headquarters. When the staff evacuated, she begged to go with them. "I need to survive long enough to find my husband," she told the officer. He shrugged. "Get in." No one checked her papers. No one cared. The war was ending. Rules didn't matter anymore. Rosa Dietrich, 23 years old, switchboard operator, parents killed in Dresden in February 1945. Rosa had no one left. Her parents died in the Dresden firebombing. Her brother was missing somewhere on the Eastern Front. She transferred units 3 times, always moving west, always running. She developed a coping mechanism: count things, buttons on her coat, steps to the latrine, breaths per minute. As long as she was counting, she wasn't thinking. And thinking hurt too much. These 6 women and 194 others had one thing in common. They believed they knew what would happen when they were captured by Americans. They were wrong. But before we get to that morning in the camp, you need to understand why they were so afraid. You need to understand the propaganda. What the Nazi government told these women about American soldiers would haunt them for months. Some of it was designed to scare them. Some of it was designed to control them. And all of it was a lie. But they didn't know that yet. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, understood one thing perfectly. Fear keeps people loyal. If you're more afraid of the enemy than you are of your own government, you'll never defect. You'll never surrender. You'll fight to the bitter end. So he fed that fear. Greta was 20, still in training. The instructor turned on the radio. A calm, clinical voice. "In the Soviet occupation zones, German women are treated as spoils of war. There is no law, no protection, no mercy. The Bolsheviks show no restraint." Every woman in the room went pale. The instructor didn't turn it off. The implication was unspoken but clear. The Americans are no different. They just hide it better. By 1944, the posters were everywhere. Train stations, town squares, barracks walls, everywhere you looked, the same images. Brutal caricatures of Allied soldiers, bold text: "Protect your women, protect your honor. The enemy shows no mercy." Liesel saw one in Frankfurt. Her mother gripped her arm so hard it bruised. "You stay away from the front, you hear me?" Liesel nodded. But by 1944, the front was everywhere. March 1945. Rosa's unit assembled for a mandatory briefing. An SS officer stood at the front, his voice flat, mechanical. "If you are captured, do not expect the Geneva Convention to protect you. You are women. To them you are not soldiers. You are prey." A young girl, maybe 18, raised her hand. "What should we do if we're captured?" The officer stared at her. "Do not be captured. Information traveled in fragments. A cousin's friend, a nurse's sister, always second-hand, never verified. I heard in the East they drag women from their homes. My aunt said the Americans are just as bad, they just don't admit it. There was a village where no sources, no proof, just fear repeated until it became truth. April 1945, 1 week before the collapse. Greta was operating her radio when she overheard 2 officers talking in the hallway. "The broadcasts are working. They're terrified." "Good. Terrified women don't defect. They fight to the end." Greta's hands froze on the Morse key. The propaganda isn't just about the enemy. It's about controlling us. She didn't tell anyone. Too dangerous. but she wrote it in her diary that night in code. They need us afraid. Not of death, of mercy. Think about that. The Nazi government didn't just lie about what the Allies would do. They made their own people more afraid of kindness than of cruelty. Because if you believe mercy is a trap, you'll never accept it. You'll fight until there's nothing left. That's what these women believed. That's what they carried with them when the war finally collapsed. And that's why when the moment came, they were so certain they knew what would happen next. They were wrong. But first, they had to survive the collapse. April 1945. The Third Reich was dying. Not quickly, not cleanly. It was dying the way a massive beast dies, thrashing chaotic, taking everything down with it. The Wehrmacht didn't retreat in an orderly fashion. It disintegrated. Entire divisions scattered without coordination. Supply lines vanished overnight. Commands were ignored or never received. And the women, those clerks and drivers and nurses, were swept along like debris in a flood. Greta's communications hub in the Ruhr Valley was encircled by American forces in early April. The officers fled first. The women were told to wait for transport. The transport never came, so they walked. Greta and 8 other women walked 30 kilometers in 2 days. No food, no map, just the knowledge that West was safer than East, and that stopping meant capture, or worse. Greta's boots tore open her heels on the first day. She wrapped them in cloth torn from her undershirt. The cloth turned red. She kept walking. Her feet screamed with every step. The pain was sharp at first, then dull, then sharp again. By the second day, she couldn't feel them anymore. She just moved. One foot, then the other. Eyes forward. Don't stop. If I stop, I die. So I don't stop. Liesel's depot was evacuated in 4 hours. March 1945. American tanks on the horizon, black smoke rising from the west. An officer shouted orders. Pack essentials. Move out. Now. Liesel grabbed her coat. Karl's letter still folded in the pocket. She followed the convoy west. They traveled in open trucks packed shoulder to shoulder. No seats, no shelter, just the truck bed and the sky and the constant rumble of the engine. At night they slept where they stopped, sometimes in barns, sometimes on the ground. Liesel shared a piece of bread with a woman she'd never met. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? The war was ending. They all knew it. You could see it in the faces of the soldiers, the way officers avoided eye contact, the lack of orders that made sense. They were running. But toward what no one knew. Annaliese's field hospital had moved 11 times in 3 months. Each time they packed the trucks faster. Each time they left more behind. By April they were barely a hospital anymore, just tents and exhausted nurses and wounded men who kept arriving even though there was nowhere to put them. Anneliese was tending to a soldier when the shelling got close. Too close. The tent shook. Dust fell from the canvas. The soldier on the table screamed. "We have to go!" Someone shouted. "Now!" They packed the trucks. They ran. Anneliese looked back once. Just once. The tent was still standing. The soldier was still on the table, anesthetized, unconscious. And then the building next to the tent took a direct hit. The explosion was massive. The shockwave knocked Anneliese forward. When she looked back again, the tent was gone. The soldier. She didn't even know his name. She climbed into the truck. She didn't speak for 3 days. Waltraud drove through chaos. Roads clogged with refugees, families with carts piled high with possessions, old men pushing wheelbarrows, children crying, stumbling too tired to keep up. Her truck had no room. She couldn't stop. She kept her eyes forward, her hands on the wheel. Don't look at the faces. Once a child ran in front of the truck. A little girl, maybe 6, chasing something, a doll or a toy. Waltraud swerved hard. The truck tilted, nearly flipped. The passengers in the back screamed. She steadied it, kept driving. The little girl stood in the road behind them, unharmed, staring. Waltraud didn't look back. I learned not to feel. Feeling gets you killed. Helena wasn't even supposed to be there. She was a civilian. No uniform, no rank. Just a woman who spoke French and had been useful to the headquarters staff. When the evacuation order came, she begged, "Please, my husband is in a French camp. I need to survive long enough to find him." The officer didn't care, but he didn't refuse either. He just shrugged. "Get in." Helena climbed into the back of a truck filled with Wehrmacht soldiers. She was the only woman, the only civilian. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her. She sat in the corner, clutching her coat, thinking about Peter, wondering if he was alive, wondering if he was thinking about her. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for victory, not for safety, just for one more day, one more chance. Rosa stood on the side of the road. March 1945. Her unit had just received the news. Dresden, firebombed, total devastation. She knew her parents were dead before the confirmation came. She just knew. She stood there staring at nothing, thinking about walking into the forest and not coming back. It would be easy. Just walk. Don't stop. Let the cold take you. What's the point? What's the point of any of this? A truck rumbled past, then stopped, reversed. A woman leaned out. Older, strong, short hair. Waltraud. Girl. Get in or get left. Rosa didn't move. Waltraud's voice softened. Just a little. I know. I lost my brother. I know. Rosa looked at her, then at the forest, then back. She climbed in. Waltraud nodded, said nothing. Sometimes survival isn't a choice. It's just the next thing you do. The captures came in pieces, different places, different times. But the fear was the same. Greta's group was stopped at an American roadblock outside Kassel. Young soldiers, 19 or 20, tired faces, M1 rifles pointed, hands up, out of the vehicle. Greta raised her hands. 12 other women did the same. One of the American soldiers looked confused. He called for his sergeant. "Sarge, what do we do with them?" The sergeant looked at the women, then at his clipboard, then back, same as the men. Process them. Move them to the cage. The cage. Greta's stomach dropped. They weren't prepared for this. No training, no protocols, no reassurances. They had been taught to type, to bandage, to drive, to follow orders. They had not been taught what to do when the war ended and they became the enemy. Liesel's convoy surrendered en masse. 200 people, soldiers and support staff mixed together. The Americans separated them immediately. Men to one area, women to another. Liesel walked with the other women, silent, terrified. She kept her hand in her coat pocket, fingers touching Karl's letter. But what if the Americans had forgotten? What if the propaganda was right? They were loaded into trucks, driven to a camp, barbed wire, mud, canvas tents. "This is it," someone whispered. "This is where it happens." No one asked what it was. They all knew. The first night in the camp was the worst. 200 women packed into tents meant for 80. No beds, no heat, just canvas and dirt and cold. They sat in clusters, whispering, waiting. An older woman, someone claimed she'd been captured weeks earlier, spoke in a low voice near the tent flap. "They take you out at night, one at a time, don't tell you where, you don't come back the same." Annalisa felt her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what that meant. She was too afraid of the answer. In another section, someone whispered a different version. Special interrogations. For women. No one knew what special meant, but the word carried weight. Heavy. Dark. Rosa sat in the corner, her coat wrapped tight, knees pulled to her chest. She counted. 47 women in her tent. 47 breaths per minute. 47 reasons to give up. Waltraud noticed. She always noticed. She sat down beside Rosa. Said nothing at first. Just sat. Then, quietly, "Don't do it, kid." Rosa didn't look at her. "Do what?" "Whatever you're thinking. I can see it in your face." "Don't." Rosa started crying. The first time since the Dresden letter. She tried to stop. Couldn't. Waltraud put a hand on her shoulder. Still said nothing. Sometimes that's all you can offer. Presence. Not hope. Just presence. Greta lay on the cold ground, staring at the canvas above her. She could hear whispers all around. Fear. Questions. Prayers. She thought about the officers she'd overheard, the ones who said the broadcasts were working, that terrified women don't defect. She thought about her diary confiscated during processing. Would they read it? Would they decode it? She thought about her father, her mother, her younger brother Hans, 16 somewhere in the Volkssturm. Please let him live. Please. She closed her eyes, tried to sleep. Couldn't. The guards walked the perimeter. Their boots crunched on gravel. Regular. Steady. Every 4 hours the shifts changed. Greta noticed. She always noticed details. If they wanted to hurt us, why guards? Why shifts? Why rules? She didn't voice this thought. The others wouldn't believe her. But she filed it away, a small seed of doubt in the certainty of fear. Morning came too fast. Guards moved through the camp before dawn shouting, "Rouse! Out! Line up! Now!" No delays, no explanations. Women stumbled from tents into the pale grey light. Cold air, mud underfoot, breath visible. They formed lines because that's what you do when soldiers shout. You obey, you don't ask questions. Annaliese's hands shook as she buttoned her coat. She'd buttoned it wrong in the rush. Didn't fix it. Liesel's breath came fast, shallow. She kept her hand on Karl's letter. A talisman. A prayer. Helena closed her eyes, lips moving. Hail Mary, full of grace. She couldn't remember the rest. Rosa counted. Women in line. Buttons. Breaths. Waltraud stood near the front-face stone. Inside her heart hammered, but her face showed nothing. Greta watched the guards, watched the camp, noticed a detail. A medical truck, parked at the edge of the compound, Red Cross symbol on the side. Medical? Why medical? It didn't fit the propaganda, didn't fit the fear. She didn't understand, but she watched. The yard was small, maybe 50 meters across. Bare dirt, patches of mud where rain had pooled, a single wire fence on 3 sides. Guard station, wood smoke smell. The sky was grey, barely dawn. The air smelled of wet canvas and fear. The women stood in uneven rows, shoulder to shoulder. Some had no coats, just thin jackets. Others wore coats, buttoned wrong, too fast, too afraid. No one spoke. Behind Greta, someone coughed. A wet, rattling sound. The kind that comes from sleeping on frozen ground too many nights. Greta counted the women in her line. 23. She counted twice, kept her mind busy, kept herself from thinking about what came next. The Americans arrived without fanfare. No announcement, just boots on gravel. Captain Thomas Mercer stepped into the yard. Clean uniform, polished boots, tired face, neutral expression. He carried a clipboard. Behind him, Corporal James Hartley. Medic, canvas bag, stethoscope around his neck. Young face, old eyes. Sergeant Paul Dawson. Rifle slung over shoulder. Not pointed. Didn't need to be. His presence was enough. Nurse Lieutenant Mary Callahan. Practical uniform, calm expression, canvas medical bag. To the women in the yard, they looked like judges. Mercer walked slowly along the first row. His boots made soft sounds in the dirt. He didn't speak. He just looked at each woman as he passed. He paused in front of one, wrote something on his clipboard, moved on. The woman began to tremble. Greta watched from 3 rows back. Her throat felt tight. She couldn't swallow. What is he writing? What did he see? Mercer reached the end of the first row, turned, walked down the second. The silence was unbearable. Somewhere behind Greta, a woman started to cry, soft, muffled, trying to stay quiet. The sound carried anyway. No one told her to stop. Then Mercer stopped in front of Waltraud Becker. He looked at her for a long moment, felt like eternity. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, not harsh. but it cut through the cold air like a blade. "Open your coat." 3 words in English. Waltraud understood English. She had learned it in school years ago, but for a moment her brain refused to process the meaning. She stared at him. He repeated it, slower this time. "Open your coat." Her hands moved to the buttons. They wouldn't obey. Her fingers were stiff, frozen, not from the cold, from fear. Behind her, the other women heard the command. Even those who didn't speak English understood the gesture. Mercer's hand mimicking the opening of a coat. Annalisa felt her knees weaken. She grabbed the arm of the woman next to her to stay upright. The woman whispered, "Not yet. Hold on. Not yet." Helena closed her eyes. Lips moved. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." She still couldn't remember the rest. Rosa stopped counting. Her breath caught. This is it. This is the moment they warned us about. Liesel felt something break inside her chest. Not pain. Worse. Resignation. This is what happens now. This is what the posters meant. This is why they told us to be afraid. Karl's letter felt heavy in her pocket, like stone. Waltraud finally opened her coat. Her hands shook. She unbuttoned it, pulled the fabric apart, beneath a thin grey shirt. It hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight. They all had. She stood there, exposed, waiting. Corporal Hartley stepped forward. He looked at her, not at her face, at her torso, her collarbone, her arms. Professional, clinical, checking for something. He made a note on a small pad, nodded to Nurse Callahan, then moved to the next woman. "Open your coat," the command repeated. Row by row, woman by woman. Some obeyed immediately, just wanted it over. Others hesitated, hands trembling, unable to work the buttons. One woman tried to close her coat again after opening it. Sergeant Dawson stepped forward, not threatening, but firm. The order was given again. She complied, crying silently. Greta's turn came. She had watched 15 women before her, seen the medic's eyes, seen him write notes, seen women pulled aside, led toward the tent at the edge of the yard. She didn't know what happened in that tent. When Mercer stopped in front of her, she didn't wait for the command. She opened her coat. She stared straight ahead, not at him, not at the medic, at the grey sky. She made herself disappear inside her own mind. A survival technique. Make yourself a ghost. Hartley glanced at her, wrote something, moved on. Greta closed her coat. Her hands shook so badly she could barely fasten the buttons. Why? Why did he barely look at me? What didn't I have that others did? She didn't understand, but she was starting to see a pattern. The women pulled aside, the ones taken to the tent. They were thin, visibly thin, collarbones jutting sharply. They were pale, waxy skin. They were coughing or swaying or struggling to stand. He's not looking at us like that. He's looking at us like patients. The realization hit her like cold water, but she didn't say it out loud, too afraid she was wrong. And if she was wrong, raising hope would crush them harder than fear ever could. So she stayed silent and watched. The inspection took 40 minutes. 200 women examined, 22 flagged, 17 taken to the tent, the rest dismissed back to the barracks. But the fear didn't leave. It shifted, changed shape. From what will they do to us to what are they doing to them? The women who weren't held back returned to the tents. They sat in clusters, whispered. They didn't do anything one said. They just looked. Looked at what our bodies. But not like that. They were checking, like doctors. Waltraud spoke, her voice firm. They gave me a blanket. She showed it. Wool. Army issue. Rough but warm. They took Rosa to the tent. I saw through the flap. She was lying down. They were wrapping her hands. Someone stared. You sure? Waltraud nodded. It was medical. It was a medical inspection. The words hung in the air. Medical. Not punishment. Not assault. Medical. It made no sense. None of it made sense. But it had happened. And slowly, carefully, like a seed pushing through frozen ground, understanding began to grow. That night the barracks felt different. The cold was the same. The hard ground was the same. The rough wool blankets and the smell of damp canvas all the same. But something had shifted. The women didn't sleep right away. They sat in small groups, speaking in voices barely above whispers. The conversations were careful at first, hesitant, as if saying the words out loud might break whatever fragile truth they had discovered. Did they hurt anyone? No. Are you sure I'm sure? They didn't touch me. They just looked and wrote something. Greta sat near the tent flap, her eyes on the medical tent across the yard. A single light burned inside. Shadows moved against the canvas. She could see silhouettes. A nurse bending over a cot. Someone sitting up drinking from a cup. Her mind worked through the details. The medic's expression. Clinical. Tired. Not cruel. The way he had scanned each woman, looking for something specific. The clipboard filling with notes. She thought about her father, a train station operator. He kept logs, tracked arrivals and departures, noted delays, problems, things that needed fixing. The American medic had looked at them the same way, not as enemies, as a list of problems that needed fixing. Liesel pulled Carl's letter from her pocket. She didn't unfold it this time, just held it. The paper was soft from being handled so many times. Maybe the Americans hadn't forgotten. Maybe they still remembered that enemies were human. The thought was too big, too strange. She pushed it away, but it stayed, hovering at the edge of her mind. Annalisa lay on her side knees, pulled to her chest. She was still coughing. The cough was deeper now, wet. Something wrong in her lungs. She knew she should tell someone. But who? The guards? They wouldn't care. Would they? She thought about the nurse. The American woman with the canvas bag. The way she had looked at the women being taken to the tent, not with disgust, not with hatred, with concern. Annalisa had seen that look before, on her father's face when he examined patients, when he cared about whether they lived or died. Could an enemy care? The question didn't make sense, but neither did anything else. Waltraud sat with her back against a tent pole, the army blanket draped over her shoulders. It smelled like soap. Clean. When was the last time she had smelled something clean? She ran her fingers over the fabric. Rough wool, standard issue, nothing special. But someone had handed it to her, an American nurse, had looked her in the eye and said something in English. Waltraud didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Here, you need this. Not a command, an offer. Waltraud had taken it. Because what else do you do when someone offers you warmth? Rosa sat in the corner, hands tucked under her arms. Her fingers throbbed. She had been hiding the pain for days, maybe weeks. Time had blurred. The cold had gotten into them. Deep. She knew frostbite when she saw it. 2 of her fingernails had turned black. She should have said something, but saying something meant being weak, and weak meant being left behind. Except they hadn't left anyone behind. They had taken 17 women to the medical tent to treat them. Rosa's mind couldn't reconcile it. Enemies don't heal, enemies hurt. So either they weren't enemies, or the rules had changed, or everything she had been taught was wrong. She started counting again. Breaths, heartbeats, seconds until dawn. It was easier than thinking. Helena whispered a prayer, a real one this time. Not the Hail Mary she couldn't remember. Just her own words. Please let Peter be alive. Please let him be safe. Please let someone be kind to him the way these Americans were kind to us today. She paused. Were they kind, or were they just following rules? Does it matter? She didn't know. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt confusion, which was better. Confusion meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant maybe, just maybe, the worst thing wasn't guaranteed. Across the camp in the medical tent, Rosa Dietrich sat on a cot, while Nurse Callahan unwrapped the cloth strips from her hands. The tent was warm. A small pot-belly stove burned in the corner. The heat was almost painful after so much cold. Rosa's skin prickled as blood returned to her extremities. Callahan worked slowly, gently, peeling away the makeshift bandages Rosa had wrapped days ago. When the last strip came off, both women went still. Rosa's fingers were mottled, dark red, purple, 2 fingernails completely black. The skin around them was grey. Callahan's jaw tightened. She looked up at Rosa, then back at the hand. She said something in English. Rosa didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. "This is bad. Why didn't you say something sooner?" Rosa just shook her head. Callahan sighed. She opened her medical bag, pulled out a brown bottle. Iodine. She pointed to the bottle, then to Rosa's hand, made a face, indicated it would hurt. Rosa nodded. She understood. Callahan poured the iodine over Rosa's fingers. The burn was instant, searing. Rosa gasped, bit down on her coat sleeve to keep from screaming. Tears streamed down her face, not from the pain, from everything. From the cold and the fear and the loss and the exhaustion, and the fact that an enemy soldier was cleaning her wounds with careful hands and apologizing in a language Rosa didn't speak. Callahan worked quickly, cleaned the wounds, applied sulfur powder, wrapped each finger in clean white gauze. When she finished, she covered Rosa with a blanket. A real blanket. Thick, warm. She said something else in English. Rosa caught one word. Rest. She understood that. Callahan brought her a cup. Soup. Real soup. With vegetables and something that might have been chicken. Rosa held the cup with her bandaged hands. The heat seeped through the gauze. She brought it to her lips, tasted it. Salt, warmth, substance. She started crying again, couldn't stop. Callahan sat beside her, didn't speak, just sat. Sometimes that's all someone needs. Presence. In another part of the tent, Annalisa Schreiber lay on a cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. She had collapsed during the inspection. One moment standing, the next her knees buckled. The woman beside her had caught her, shouted for help. The American medic Hartley had run over, knelt in the mud, checked her pulse. "When did you last eat?" Annalisa had tried to answer. Couldn't remember. "Yesterday, I think. Before that, I don't remember." He had lifted her. She weighed nothing, carried her to the tent, laid her on a cot. Now she lay here, an IV needle in her arm. She had never seen an IV before. The tube ran from her arm to a glass bottle hanging above the cot, clear liquid dripping slowly into her veins. Hartley had explained something. She didn't understand English, but a German-speaking prisoner, a clerk helping with translation, had told her, "Fluids. You're dehydrated. This will help." Annalisa watched the liquid drip. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. She felt cold, then warm, then cold again. Fever. Callahan came over, pressed a hand to Annalisa's forehead, frowned, pulled out a stethoscope. "Breathe," she said. The word was similar enough in German. "Atmen." Annalisa breathed. Callahan listened, moved the stethoscope, listened again. She looked at Hartley, said something. Hartley came over, listened, nodded. "Pneumonia," he said. The translator repeated it in German. Annalisa closed her eyes. Pneumonia. She had seen men die from pneumonia in the field hospitals, coughing blood, lungs filling with fluid, drowning from the inside. She was going to die here, in an enemy camp, alone. Callahan brought a bowl, warm broth, spooned it slowly into Annalisa's mouth. Small sips. Easy. "You need to eat." The broth was warm, salty, real. Annalisa swallowed, then another spoonful, then another. Callahan stayed with her, patient, until the bowl was empty. Then she brought bread. Real bread, soft, white. Annalise ate half of it, couldn't manage more. Callahan nodded, smiled, said something encouraging. She pulled the blanket up to Annalise's chin, tucked it around her shoulders. Rest now. We'll check on you soon. Annalisa wanted to say thank you, couldn't find the words, in any language. She just nodded, and for the first time in weeks she slept without nightmares. Morning came. Day 2 in the camp. The women who had been held in the medical tent overnight began returning to the barracks. Rosa entered first, her hands wrapped in clean white bandages, her face less gaunt. She had eaten, slept in warmth. The women stared. Waltraud stood, walked over. They treated you? Rosa nodded. The nurse cleaned my fingers. She said 2 might be saved. The others? She paused. Might not, but she was kind. She was careful. They didn't hurt you? Rosa shook her head. No. They gave me medicine. And bread. Real bread. The word real hung in the air. Real bread. Real medicine. Real care. Not cruelty. Not assault. Not the propaganda. Just medical treatment. Liesel spoke quietly. Why no one had an answer. By mid-morning, Annalisa was strong enough to sit up, still weak, still feverish, but improving. Callahan checked on her every hour, brought water, more broth, pills, antibiotics, the translator explained, for the infection. Annalisa took them, swallowed them with water. She watched Callahan work, watched her move between cots, checking on other women, adjusting blankets, dispensing medication. She moved like Annalisa's father had moved, with purpose, with care. Like someone who had taken an oath to heal, regardless of who needed healing. On the second day, Annalisa finally asked the question, "Why are you helping me?" The translator repeated it in English. Callahan looked at her. Her expression was tired, but gentle. "Because you're sick, and I'm a nurse." The translator relayed it. Annalisa shook her head. "But I'm German. I'm the enemy." Callahan paused, thought about how to answer. "You're a patient. That's all I see." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not a German, not an enemy, a patient, someone who needed help. And Callahan was someone whose job was to help. That was all. Annalisa lay back, stared at the ceiling. I thought they would see me as something less than human. Instead, they saw me as someone who needed help, and they helped me. She didn't understand it, but she was grateful. Back in the barracks, the conversations grew bolder. Women who had been silent for days began to speak. They shared what they had seen, what they had felt, what they had expected versus what had actually happened. Greta listened, observed, collected details the way she had collected radio signals, looking for patterns. A woman named Bridget, older than most, maybe 30, spoke up. We were lied to. The tent went quiet. All those stories, all those warnings. They told us the Americans were monsters. They told us to fear them more than death. She shook her head slowly. But look at us. We're still here. We're still alive. They examined us like doctors. They fed us like people. She paused. Either everything we were told was wrong, or this is some kind of trick. Waltraud spoke. It's not a trick. I've seen tricks. This wasn't one. Then what was it? Waltraud thought for a long moment. Procedure. Just procedure. They have rules. They followed them. It wasn't a grand answer, not a comforting one, but it was honest. Liesel spoke quietly. The Geneva Convention. I heard officers mention it before. What's that? Rules for war. Treatment of prisoners. Waltraud nodded. Rules, we were told, didn't apply to us. Greta leaned forward. But they did. They applied them anyway. The realization spread through the tent like dawn. They had expected chaos. They got order. They had expected cruelty. They got procedure. They had expected monsters. They got people following rules. Simple rules, but rules that made all the difference. A younger woman, Frida, maybe 18, struggled with it. But why? Why follow rules for us? We're nobody. Greta spoke, her voice quiet but clear. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the rules apply to everybody, even nobodies. Long silence. Outside, the guards walked their rounds, boots on gravel, steady, regular. Inside, women sat with thoughts too big to voice. That night, Greta wrote in her diary. It had been returned to her that evening. A guard had brought it, handed it to her without comment. She opened it. Terrified, they had read it, decoded it, but nothing was added, nothing removed. They had given it back. She sat by candlelight, pen moving slowly across the page. Today I learned that not all enemies are the same. Today I learned that fear can lie louder than truth. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this. The war I was taught to expect is not the war I am living through, and I do not know what to believe anymore. She paused, then added one more line. The enemy in my mind was far worse than the enemy in front of me. She closed the diary. Across the camp, Corporal Hartley sat outside the medical tent, smoking, exhausted. Nurse Callahan joined him. You okay? Yeah, just tired. Hartley took a drag, exhaled slowly. I lost my brother at Normandy. Callahan looked at him. I'm sorry. He was a medic too, trying to save a guy in a foxhole. Sniper got him. Hartley stared at his hands. I volunteered after that. Figured if I couldn't save him, I could save someone else's brother. He looked at the tent. Didn't expect to be saving enemy nurses and clerks. But, he shrugged, a life's a life. Callahan nodded. I treated German soldiers last month, POWs from the Rhine crossing. She paused. One was 17. 17, barely shaving. Her voice thickened. He kept asking for his mother, kept saying mutti mutti. She looked at Hartley. I held his hand when he died, because his mother couldn't. She took a breath. War doesn't make sense, so I just do what makes sense to me. I heal people. Captain Mercer stepped out of the shadows. That's all we can do. Follow the rules. Treat them humanely. Hartley looked up. Some people think that makes us weak. Mercer's voice was firm. Some people are wrong. He crossed his arms. We're Americans. We follow the Geneva Convention, even when the enemy didn't, especially then. Hartley nodded slowly. That's what makes us different. Exactly. The three of them stood in silence. The camp was quiet, just the sound of wind through canvas and the distant crackle of the stove. Mercer spoke again. These women expected us to be monsters. We showed them we're not. He looked at the barracks. Maybe that's the greatest victory we can win, not on a battlefield, but here, in a muddy camp, following simple rules. Callahan smiled slightly. Simple rules that say everyone deserves dignity, even enemies. Mercer nodded. Especially enemies. The next morning, Greta woke before dawn. She lay on the cold ground, watching the canvas ceiling lighten from black to grey. She thought about the propaganda, the broadcasts, the posters, the whispered stories, all designed to make her afraid, to make her see Americans as monsters. But monsters don't give blankets. Monsters don't treat frostbite. Monsters don't follow rules that protect their enemies. Monsters destroy. The Americans had built a medical tent, a system, order. She sat up, looked around the tent, women sleeping, some snoring, some restless, all alive, all safe. The propaganda had lied, not just about what the Americans would do, but about what America was. Outside the sun was rising. Another day, another chance to survive. But more than that, another chance to understand that enemies could be human, that rules could protect, that even in war mercy was possible, if you chose to follow it. By the end of the first week, The fear had transformed, not gone. Fear doesn't disappear that easily, but it had changed shape, from the certainty of suffering to the uncertainty of what comes next. And uncertainty, strange as it seemed, was better, because uncertainty meant possibility. Possibility that they might go home, that they might see their families, that they might survive not just physically, but with their humanity intact. The Americans had given them that, not through speeches, not through propaganda of their own, through breakfast, through bandages, through blankets, through the simple act of seeing prisoners as people and treating them accordingly. It was such a small thing, and such a powerful thing. In the barracks, women began to talk about the future. Carefully, tentatively. What will you do when you go home? I don't know. Find my family, if they're still alive. I want to see my mother. Tell her I'm okay. I want to sleep in a real bed. For a week. Small hopes, human hopes, the kind of hopes you only allow yourself when you believe you might have a future. Rosa sat with her bandaged hands in her lap. She had stopped counting obsessively, started counting differently, days until she might go home, fingers that might be saved, reasons to keep going. The numbers were different now, less about survival, more about living. Waltraud still kept the blanket, folded it each morning, unfolded it each night. It was proof. Proof that in the worst moment of her life someone had seen her suffering and chosen to help. Not because they had to, because they could, and they decided to. Annalisa stayed in the medical tent for 3 more days. Her pneumonia was serious, but with rest and medicine she improved. Callahan checked on her constantly, brought soup, water, pills. On the 3rd day, Annalisa was strong enough to speak more. "Why did you become a nurse?" The translator repeated the question. Callahan thought about it. "Because people need help, and I can help them." She smiled. "It's that simple." Annalise nodded. "In my country, we were taught that you were evil, that Americans had no mercy." Callahan's smile faded. "I know. We heard the same about Germans." She paused. "But you're not evil. You're sick and scared and far from home." She adjusted Annalisa's blanket. "Just like our boys when they're in field hospitals. Just like anyone in a war they didn't start." Annalisa felt tears on her face. "Thank you for seeing me." Callahan squeezed her hand. "You're easy to see. You're right here." It was such a simple statement, but it meant everything. That night the women gathered near the tent flap, unable to sleep, too much to process. They talked about what they had seen, what they had learned. Greta spoke. "I think I understand now why they did it." Everyone looked at her. "It's not about us. It's about them." "What do you mean, they have rules?" "The Geneva Convention. And they follow those rules. Not because we deserve it, but because that's who they are." She paused. "We were told Americans were monsters, but monsters don't follow rules. Monsters do whatever they want." Waltraud nodded slowly. "These Americans did what they were supposed to do, even when it was hard, even when we were their enemies." Liesel added quietly. "That's what makes them different. Not that they're perfect, but that they have rules, and they follow them." Rosa spoke for the first time in the group. At home, the rules kept changing, whatever the party said, whatever was convenient. Here, the rules stayed the same, even for us. The realization settled over them. It wasn't kindness exactly, though there had been kindness. It was something else, something bigger, consistency, integrity, a system that didn't bend based on who was in front of you, that treated everyone, even enemies, with basic dignity, because the rules said so, and the rules mattered more than hate. Greta lay down that night with a thought she couldn't shake. If America could do this, could follow rules even for enemies, what else had she been lied to about? What else was possible? She didn't have answers. But for the first time in years, she had questions that didn't terrify her. Questions that opened doors instead of closing them. And in a world that had been nothing but locked doors and dead ends, that was something. That was hope. Week 2 began with something none of the women expected. Breakfast. Not the thin gruel they had eaten in the field. Not the stale bread and ersatz coffee that had sustained them during the retreat. Real breakfast. The mess hall was a large tent with wooden tables and benches. The women filed in, uncertain, still cautious. Trays were handed out, metal trays with divided sections, and then the food, scrambled eggs. Real eggs, not powder, yellow and fluffy and steaming. Toast, white bread toasted golden with butter, real butter. Coffee, real coffee. The smell alone was enough to make some women stop in their tracks. And bacon, American bacon. Rosa stood in line staring at her tray, at the food piled on it, more food than she had seen in months. She sat down at a table, set the tray in front of her, looked at the bacon. The smell hit her first. Smoky, salty, rich, unmistakably American. She had been told Americans would starve prisoners. "This is what they feed enemies." Her hands shook. The bandages made it difficult to hold the fork. She managed. She picked up a piece of bacon, brought it to her mouth. The taste exploded on her tongue, crispy on the outside, the edges shattering between her teeth with an audible crack, tender inside the meat yielding almost melting, salt and smoke and fat coating her tongue. The texture perfect, crisp edges giving way to tender, juicy meat that released its flavor in waves, warm grease on her lips. The taste flooding her mouth, smoky and rich and impossibly, undeniably real. Every sense screaming, this is mercy. Warm, substantial, real. She put the bacon down, her eyes filled with tears. Waltrode, sitting across from her, leaned forward. "What's wrong?" Rosa couldn't speak. She just shook her head. Greta, sitting beside her, understood. "It's real, isn't it? The food, the medicine, all of it." Rosa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We were lied to, about everything." Around them, other women were having similar realizations. Some ate in silence, overwhelmed. Some cried quietly. Some just stared at their plates, unable to reconcile years of propaganda with the simple reality of bacon and eggs. Liesl took a bite of toast. The butter melted on her tongue. She closed her eyes. This is what the enemy feeds us. She thought about Karl, about his letter, about everything she had been taught. None of it made sense anymore. Or maybe for the first time things were starting to make sense. Just not in the way she had expected. If you or your father served as a guard at a POW camp during World War II, I'd love to hear about it. What was that experience like? Did you see moments where following the rules made all the difference? Leave a comment below and share those stories. Let's keep these memories alive. That afternoon, something new happened. A woman arrived at the camp. Not a prisoner, a visitor, Martha Colby, 52 years old, wife of a Texas rancher, wearing a simple dress and a warm smile. She came with a basket, homemade pies, apple pies. Captain Mercer met her at the gate. "Mrs. Colby, good to see you again." "Captain, I brought dessert for the girls." Mercer smiled. "They'll appreciate it." Martha walked through the camp. Women stared. An American civilian. Here, voluntarily. She set up at a table outside the mess hall, started cutting pies into slices. Captain Mercer made an announcement in English. A translator repeated it in German. "Mrs. Colby has brought pies. She's also offering to teach basic English to anyone interested." The women hesitated, unsure. Greta stepped forward first. "I would like to learn." Martha smiled, handed her a slice of pie. "What's your name, honey Greta?" "Well, Greta, let's start with something simple. This is pie." She pointed to the slice. "Pie." Greta repeated it. "Pie." Martha's smile widened. "Perfect. Now eat it while it's warm." Greta took a bite. The apples were sweet and tart, the crust flaky and buttery, cinnamon and sugar. It tasted like home. Not her home, but someone's home. a place where mothers baked pies and families gathered around tables, a place that felt impossibly far away. She looked at Martha. "Why are you here?" The translator repeated the question. Martha's smile faded slightly. Her eyes grew distant. "I lost my son, at Anzio, in Italy, 2 years ago." She paused. "He was 23, just a boy." The women around the table went quiet. Martha continued. "Before he died, I hope someone was kind to him. I hope if he was scared or hurt, someone helped him." Her voice thickened. "I can't help my son anymore, but I can help you. And maybe somewhere someone helped him." She wiped her eyes. "So I'm here, because it's what I can do." Greta felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry, for your son." Martha nodded. "Thank you, honey. Now let's learn some English. You'll need it when you go home." Over the next week, Martha came 3 times. She brought pies, taught simple English phrases, listened to the women's halting attempts at conversation. She was patient, kind, never asked about the war, about what they had done or believed. She just treated them like people, like daughters, like young women far from home who needed someone to be gentle. On her 3rd visit, she brought her husband, Jack Colby, 58 years old, Texas rancher, weathered face, calm eyes. He came with his horse, a beautiful chestnut mare named Texas Star. He stood at the fence line, the horse beside him. Women gathered, curious. Jack spoke. The translator repeated. "My wife tells me some of you have never ridden a horse." A few women nodded. "Well, after the war, if you ever come back to Texas, I'll teach you. Promise." He looked directly at Rosa. She was standing near the front, bandaged hands visible. "You especially. You look like you've got grit. You'd make a good rider." Rosa stared at him, then at the horse. She stepped forward, reached through the fence, placed her bandaged hand on Texas Star's neck. The horse was warm, solid, real. Jack extended his hand through the fence. "Deal." Rosa looked at his hand, then at his face. She shook his hand with her bandaged one. "Deal." Jack smiled. "Good. I'll hold you to it." That image, a German prisoner of war and a Texas rancher shaking hands through a fence, an American flag visible in the background. That was the moment that would have made the perfect photograph, the perfect symbol, enemy and American, meeting as equals, making a promise about the future. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't grand, but it was real. And real was more powerful than any propaganda could ever be. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered. The news reached the camp in the afternoon. The Americans celebrated, cautiously, respectfully. The German women sat quietly, processing. The war was over. Germany had lost. Everything they had known, everything they had fought for, was gone. But they were alive. That evening, Captain Mercer gathered everyone in the mess hall, Americans and Germans together. He stood at the front, spoke clearly. The translator repeated each sentence. "The war is over. Germany has surrendered." Silence. "For you Americans, you did your duty. You served with honor. Be proud." The American soldiers nodded. Some looked relieved, some looked tired, all looked ready to go home. Mercer turned to the German women. "For you the war is over, but your lives are not." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You will go home. You will rebuild. And I truly hope you will remember that America is not your enemy." He paused. "Fear was your enemy. Propaganda was your enemy. We were just people, following rules, trying to be decent." Long silence. Then Greta stood. Everyone looked at her. Captain Mercer. "May I speak?" Mercer looked surprised. "Yes." Greta took a breath, spoke in halting English. "We were told Americans are monsters. We were told you will hurt us." Her voice shook but held steady. "We were lied to." She gestured around the room. "You gave us food, medicine, blankets, kindness, tears in her eyes. You gave us humanity." Her voice broke. Thank you for seeing us, not as enemies, as people. She sat down. Other women stood, one by one, crying. The Americans, many of them, were crying too. Hartley looked at Callahan. War's over, and we actually did something good. Callahan smiled through tears. We just did our jobs. Hartley shook his head. No, we did more than that. The releases began in mid-May. Annalisa was released first. Her pneumonia cleared. Weight improved. Callahan walked her to the gate. Take care of yourself. Eat. Rest. Annalise hugged her, both women crying. You saved my life. Callahan held her tight. You're strong. You saved yourself. I just helped. Annalisa pulled back. I will never forget you. Callahan smiled. Good luck, kid. Annalisa walked through the gate. Free. She turned back once, waved. Callahan waved back. Then Annalisa walked toward the future, whatever it held. She traveled for 3 weeks. Red Cross trucks, trains, walking. Finally reached her parents' farm in Bavaria. Her father saw her first. He was in the field mending a fence. He dropped his tools, started running. Her mother came out of the house, saw them, started running too. They met in the middle of the yard, all 3 of them, holding each other, crying. You're alive, that's all that matters. Rosa's surgery happened in late May. 3 fingers amputated, 2 saved. Hartley performed the surgery himself, did everything he could. When Rosa woke, her hand was wrapped in clean bandages. Hartley sat beside her. We saved what we could. Rosa looked at her hand, nodded. You saved what mattered. You saved me. Hartley handed her extra bandages. Instructions. Keep it clean. Change the dressing daily. Rosa took them. Thank you for trying. Hartley's voice was quiet. I wish I could have saved more. Rosa shook her head. You saved enough. She was released in early June. She had no family, no home. The Red Cross placed her in a displaced persons camp. 6 months later, she moved to Munich, got a job in a bakery, learned to knead dough with her scarred hand. 1948. She was accepted to teach a training college, learned to write with her left hand, used her right for support. 1952. She started teaching at a village school near Munich, reading, writing, arithmetic. The children asked about her hand sometimes. An accident, she would say, a long time ago. It was easier than explaining, easier than describing the cold, the fear the American medic who had looked at her ruined fingers and said, we'll do what we can. They had done what they could. It hadn't been enough to save her hand, but it had been enough to save her. Waltraud was released mid-June. She approached Captain Mercer before leaving. Thank you, sir, for everything. Mercer handed her something. The blanket, the one Callahan had given her. Keep it. You'll need it. Waltraud stared at the blanket, then at Mercer. I don't understand. Why were you kind to us? Mercer thought about his answer. Because you're people, and we're Americans. We don't abandon our principles just because it's hard. Waltraud nodded slowly. I will remember that. Good. She walked to the gate, stopped, turned back. Captain, what makes someone a good person? Mercer smiled slightly, following the rules, even when no one's watching, even when it's difficult. Waltraud carried that answer with her, along with the blanket, for the rest of her life. She went back to Hamburg, found her parents alive. The family auto shop was damaged but repairable. She worked there, lived quietly, never married. Her fiancé was never found, never confirmed dead, never confirmed alive. She couldn't move on, couldn't let go. She kept the blanket, used it every winter. The wool thinned, the edges frayed. 1975. It finally fell apart, too worn to repair. Waltraud cried when she threw it away. It was proof, she told a friend. Proof that in the worst moment of my life someone saw my suffering and chose to help. 1998. Waltraud died of lung problems related to her time in the war. She was buried with a photograph of her brother and a small piece of wool. cut from the blanket before it fell apart, kept in her Bible. Greta was released last. She had stayed to help translate, to assist with processing. Her final conversation with Mercer happened in his office. "Why did you treat us like you did?" Mercer leaned back in his chair. "Because you're people, and we're Americans. We don't abandon our principles just because it's hard." Greta pressed. Even for enemies, Mercer's voice was firm. "Especially for enemies. That's what makes us different." Greta thought about that. "In my country, the rules kept changing, whatever was convenient." Mercer nodded. "In America, we believe some rules don't change. Human dignity, fair treatment, justice." He looked at her. "Those aren't just nice ideas. They're who we are, or who we try to be." Greta stood, extended her hand. "Thank you, Captain, for teaching me that." They shook hands. "Go home, Greta. Rebuild. Live well." She walked out, into the sun, into freedom, into a future she hadn't been sure she would have. She returned to Bavaria. Her parents wept when they saw her. Her brother Hans had survived, 16 years old, had never seen combat. Greta worked as a translator for the occupation government. The irony wasn't lost on her, using English to help the occupiers. But she didn't mind. The Americans she worked with were professional, fair. They followed rules. 1951. She married an engineer named Thomas, had 2 children, a son in 1953, a daughter in 1956. She didn't talk about the war. Not to her children, not to anyone. It was too complicated, too painful. But she kept writing in her diary, in code, for decades. 40 years passed. 1985. Greta Hoffman, now 62, received a letter from America. The return address said Mary Callahan O'Brien. Greta's hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Greta, I was a nurse at Camp Hearn in Texas in 1945. I treated German women prisoners. I have thought of you all often over the years. If you are the Greta Hoffman from the camp, I would like to speak with you. Please write back." With warm regards, Mary Greta sat down, read the letter 3 times. Then she wrote back immediately. "Dear Mary, I am that Greta. I remember you. I remember everything. I would very much like to speak with you." 6 months later, the phone call. International. Expensive. Greta's husband arranged it. Paid for it. The phone rang. Greta picked up, hands shaking. "Hello, Greta Mary. It's really you." Both women started crying. They talked for an hour, about their lives, their families, the years that had passed. Mary had married, had 3 children, worked as a nurse until retirement, lived in Connecticut now. Greta told her about Bavaria, about Thomas, about her children, about how she had never forgotten that camp, that inspection, that moment when she thought her life was ending, and how it had ended. But not her life. Her fear. Finally, Greta said what she needed to say. "Mary, I need you to know something. Yes, you saved us. Not just our lives, our faith in humanity." Mary's voice was thick with tears. "I just did my job." Greta's voice was firm. "No, you did more. You were kind when you didn't have to be. You saw us as human when everyone else saw us as enemies." She paused. "You saved my soul, Mary." Callahan was crying openly now. "You were never my enemy, Greta. You were a young woman who needed help. That's all I ever saw. They promised to write. They did. Letters every few months. Mary sent pictures of her grandchildren. Greta sent pictures of hers. They wrote about ordinary things, recipes, gardens, grandchildren's accomplishments, and sometimes carefully they wrote about the war, about what it had taught them, about what they had learned. Until Mary died in 1999, 79 years old, peaceful. Greta kept every letter, treasured them, proof that enemies could become friends, that mercy could transcend war, that humanity once recognized could last a lifetime. 1985, the same year Greta received Mary's letter. Rosa, now 62, did something she had thought about for 40 years. She went back to Texas. She found Jack Colby, 83 years old, still ranching, moving slower, but still sharp. She knocked on his door. He opened it, stared at her, then smiled. "I remember you, the German girl with the frostbite." Rosa held up her scarred hand. "You said you'd teach me to ride." Jack laughed. "I did, didn't I? Well, come on then. Texas Star's gone, but I got her grandson." They walked to the stable. Jack saddled the horse, a beautiful bay named Lone Star. He helped Rosa mount. Her scarred hand gripped the reins. Her good hand held the saddle horn. Jack led the horse in a slow walk around the corral, then handed her the reins. "You take it from here." Rosa rode, slowly at first, then faster. The Texas wind hit her face, warm, dry, nothing like the cold that had taken her fingers 40 years ago. She rode across the field, past the fence line, out toward the horizon where the sky met the earth in an endless blue line, and something broke inside her. Not pain, release. For 40 years she had carried it, the fear, the cold, the certainty that she would die in that camp, that no one would remember her, that she would be forgotten. But Jack had remembered. Jack had kept his promise. She pulled the horse to a stop, sat there, the wind in her hair, tears streaming down her face. Jack rode up beside her on his own horse. "You okay?" Rosa nodded, couldn't speak. Jack understood. He reached over, took her scarred hand in his weathered one. "You came back. That takes grit." Rosa found her voice. "You promised to teach me, even though I was your enemy." Jack shook his head. "You were never my enemy." He gestured to the field, the ranch, the endless Texas sky. "This is America. We don't keep enemies. We make friends." He smiled. "Even if it takes 40 years. Rosa laughed through her tears. They rode back together, side by side, German and American, past and present, enemy and friend. That evening, Jack showed her something. A photograph, 1945, Texas Star at the fence. A young German woman with bandaged hands reaching through. Rosa, 23, terrified, barely alive. "You kept it." Jack nodded. "I knew you'd come back. I just didn't know when." He handed her the photo. "This is yours now. Proof that promises matter." Rosa held the photo, looked at her younger self, broken, hopeless, and then at herself now, 62, scarred but whole, a teacher, a survivor, a woman who had learned that enemies could become family, if you gave them 40 years, and a horse, and a promise kept. They stayed in touch after that. Letters, Christmas cards. Rosa visited Texas twice more, once in 1988, once in 1992. Jack taught her to rope, to mend fences, to read the weather. They became friends, real friends. When Jack died in 1995, Rosa flew to Texas for the funeral. She stood by his grave, placed a flower, whispered a prayer in German. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." 2012, Frankfurt, Germany. Greta Hoffmann, 87 years old, stood in a small bookstore. Her book launch, Fear's Long Shadow, a memoir based on her diary. The room was full. Historians, students, families. One special guest, Annalisa Schreiber's daughter. Annalisa had died in 2003. Her daughter brought a photograph. Annalisa and Mary Callahan, taken in 1986. During a reunion visit, both women smiling, arms around each other. Greta held up the photograph. "This woman saved my friend's life. Not with weapons, not with speeches, with medicine and kindness." Her voice was strong despite her age. "This book is dedicated to 200 women who survived, and to the Americans who could have been cruel but chose mercy." She paused. "They didn't choose mercy because they liked us. They chose it because they were Americans, and Americans follow rules that preserve dignity." She held up something else, something small, wrapped in tissue paper. She unwrapped it carefully. A piece of bacon wrapper, yellowed with age, preserved between sheets of wax paper. This is from my breakfast, May 1945, Camp Hearn, Texas. The room went silent. I kept it, all these years, because it represented something I couldn't explain to anyone who wasn't there. She looked at the audience. Fear can lie louder than truth. Propaganda can make you see monsters where there are only people. Her voice grew soft. But truth waits, patient, quiet. She smiled. And sometimes truth tastes like bacon, laughter through tears, like freedom, like kindness, like America. She held up her diary, the original, coded shorthand, 87 years of entries. I wrote something in April 1945, after an American officer told me to open my coat, and I thought my life was ending. She read from the page. The enemy in my mind was far worse than the enemy in front of me. She paused. That's the lesson. Not that Americans are perfect. They're not. Not that war is anything but brutal. It is. Her voice strengthened. But that even in brutality we have choices. We can follow hate, or we can follow rules that preserve dignity. The Americans chose rules, and those rules saved us. Standing ovation. Greta stood there, 87 years old, survivor, witness, teacher. The book became a bestseller in Germany, translated into English, read by thousands. Schools invited her to speak. She went, told her story, answered questions. Young people asked her things their grandparents never talked about. Were you a Nazi? I was a German. I worked for the Wehrmacht. I believed what I was told, until I learned it was lies. Do you hate Americans? I learned what America meant. In a prisoner camp in Texas, it means rules that don't change based on who you are. It means dignity for everyone, even enemies. What's the most important lesson? She thought about that. Fear is a weapon. But truth is stronger. Propaganda divides. But humanity connects. The rules we follow when it's hardest, those rules define us. She paused. And bacon helps. The students laughed. But they understood. Greta died in 2019, 94 years old, surrounded by family. Her diary was donated to the German National Archive, translated, published in full, her story and the stories of 200 women preserved, so that future generations would know that in the darkest war in history in a muddy camp in Texas, mercy triumphed over revenge, rules triumphed over hate, and 200 terrified women learned that the monsters they feared were just people, people who chose every single day to do what was right, not because it was easy, but because it was who they were, Americans. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, share it. Share it with a veteran who served. Share it with your children who need to know what America means. Share it with someone who's forgotten. Because this isn't just history, it's a promise that even in our darkest moments we have a choice. Fear or principle. Hate or humanity. Monster or American. The women in this story learned the difference in 3 words. Open your coat. 3 words that led not to violence, but to bacon, to blankets, to a truth that lasted 80 years and counting. Greta died in 2019, but her diary lives on, her story lives on, and every time someone hears it, learns it, shares it, the promise continues. The promise that mercy is stronger than revenge, that rules matter more than hate, and that sometimes truth tastes like bacon,